A very good afternoon to all of you, respected chairperson sir, resource person sir, and all the participants present here. This is our first technical session. In this session, Professor Adil Yasin sir is with us. Now, I would like to request our assistant coordinator, Dr. Manoj Kumar Das, to introduce our resource person sir. So Manoj Das.
Thank you, Deepan. Good afternoon, everyone. It is my immense pleasure to introduce amongst ourselves retired Professor Adil Yasin. He had retired from the Department of Political Science, Dibrugarh University. Earlier, he worked in Cotton College and Deepur College as well. Everybody is requested to mute their microphones. He completed his MPhil degree from New Delhi and did his doctorate degree for PhD in Dibrugarh University. His area of interest is international relations, foreign policy, human rights issues, peace and conflict resolution. Today, he will equip us with knowledge of a theoretical framework of human rights. I hope we will be enriched by his fruitful lecture. So, initially we allotted 90 minutes for this technical session, but due to some technical glitches and delayed, we have to reduce the time. So we have to conclude your lecture by 2:15 p.m. So I hope everybody will gain from your lecture. So now the whole platform is yours. You can proceed now, sir. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all. Respected chairperson, respected distinguished participants, and the organizers of the webinar. And I am very much thankful and gratitude to the organizers of the webinar to give me these opportunities to speak on human rights, especially on theoretical framework of human rights. So I have divided my lecture into 3 segments. The first segment, I will speak on the basic concept of human rights. Then second segment, probably I will discuss more on the historical developments of human rights. Then the third segment, I'll discuss human rights are the evolution of philosophical inquiry. So here, first of all, I will give an idea about the rights. Then I'll talk about this thing, why human rights have, or why human beings have the human rights. Why not animals? So these things I will discuss one by one. Firstly, I will discuss the rights. What is rights? So rights are the claim, or rights is a claim recognized by society and enforced by the state. So here are 3 things you will find. The one is the individual, one is the society, another is the state. So here you will find the basic things, the individual. Now people are more, some scholars are giving more importance on individual rights, and therefore we have developed the liberal individualism. Some scholars have given more importance on the social rights, especially empiricists and the Marxist scholars. So in this definition, the rights itself, you'll find these 2 things, and at the same time about the state enforces the rights. So necessarily it includes the constitutional law and international law, which has implemented these human rights. Now, question is that why human beings have this human rights? Human beings have the conscience, or human beings have the rationality or reason. It is the human being who is a thinking animal who thinks, and therefore he has what is called sympathy and emotions and affection towards others. And at the same time, the thoughts comes continuously. The one person, he has thoughts daily. something like 60,000 to 70,000 thoughts comes to an individual. Now we are thinking animal and we have the conscience. And because of this conscience, that we claim rights. The animal, they do not claim rights. It is the individual. It is the individual human being. They, in fact, they concern about rights. So therefore, human rights are, in fact, these are inherent in human nature, and these are inalienable, and it is universal. But it is a debatable question whether it is universal or not. So I may discuss it later on. But it's a question of, again, I will repeat this thing that human beings, they think. As for example, the great philosopher Descartes, he says, I think, therefore I am. So because of this aspect, the human beings, they have this consciousness. Because of this consciousness, they are concerned about these things, and they are concerned about the dignity of life. And necessarily, they want to live a dignified life. Now, here's a question when you talk about this thing, the rationality and conscience. But question is that when a newborn baby, whether he has got or she has got the rationality or not, a newborn baby. Some people have said this in the newborn baby doesn't have the rights because they do not have the consciousness. Now, another argument has been given that the terminally ill patient who is supported by the mechanical system, he also does not have rights because the terminally ill patient. Now again, the question comes whether would I have rights if I live alone?
Coffee duta, egg patties eta, chicken patties, paneer patties eta, onion patties duta. Pringles
If I live alone in a society, or if I live in an island, whether I have rights or not. Now these are some of the questions. So necessarily comes to our mind. Suppose whether a newborn baby has rights or not, whether a terminally ill patient has rights or not, or if a person lived in an island alone, whether he has rights or not. But these are some of the questions. But at the same time, the moot point is that it is the conscience which is more important, because of which human beings have rights. So because the animals, they do not claim rights. A cow, a dog, they do not claim rights. So this is the basic concept when it talked about this thing. So a right is a claim recognized by society and enforced by the state. So therefore, now question is that rights have a tendency to grow and develop and expand because of the certain conflict, social conflict. Now here I will come to the second segment of my lecture, the why rights grow, or what are the consequences of the growth of these rights, or why these rights have developed because of the certain situation. So therefore here I just give a historical definition of historical narration. So there are certain historical narrations are also necessary to get an idea of why rights are developed or evolved. Now in that connection, I must say something about the religious scriptures which are talking about the rights, but these are not human rights as such, but these are moral rights. So these moral rights are especially mentioned by the Hinduism, by the Christianity, by the Islam. Suppose when Hindu scriptures, they talked about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, it means what? Universal brotherhood. Or when it's in the Quran, it has been mentioned, if you kill one person as if you are killing the whole humankind, or if you are saving a person as if you are saving the whole humankind. Or in the Christianity, Bible also, they have mentioned several times. In other religious scriptures also, they have mentioned, don't steal the property of others, don't steal property of others. So which has indirectly recognized the rights of the property rights. So these religious scriptures, religious texts, they also talks about, they also talk about the rights, and which was, later on developed as a right in later part of the 20th century, or in the middle part of the 20th century. Now, in that connection, I may mention, I mention, in fact, the writings of Plato, Aristotle, then Saint Thomas Aquinas, Saint Augustine. So these are early classical philosophers. They also talked about these things, about the rights, about these moral rights, even especially especially Aristotle. Plato also said this thing. He talks about the fair treatment to all the citizens. Then Saint Augustine said this thing, that everybody is equal before God. Then Aristotle also discussed the importance of virtue and justice. Cicero also talked about the citizen of the world. So here also, in these writings of the earlier classical philosophers also, they talked about the rights or universal character of the rights, whether it is Aristotle, whether it is Cicero, whether it is Saint Augustine, whether it is Plato. So they also talk about these things, about the rights, but these are in fact more or less moral rights. But subsequently, when I talk about a development of rights, then you will find, especially the Magna Carta. We'll have to mention the Magna Carta in 1215, when in fact subjects revolted, or they protested against the rule of King John, when he suppressed or when he abused his power. Then there was a conflict between the subject and King John about these things. In fact, the king should not have the absolute power. King could not take away the property of the people, and he should respect and he cannot detain or arrest a person without proper trial, and then it has given the importance to family. So therefore, in the Magna Carta also, especially in 1215, in the 13th century, so there was a development of human rights when this Magna Carta, especially 1215, we have seen this thing, how right was, that time, it was, concept of right was developed. Then you will find that in case of, the American Declaration of Independence in 1776, especially the representative of American Congress, it emphasized on life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. So this is also very interesting. The American Declaration of Independence in 1776, they emphasize on the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. Then another declaration made by the French Declaration of the Rights of Man in 1789, they also mention, in fact, they mention about the men are from birth, free and equal in rights. And these rights are liberty, property, security, and resistance to oppression. So it is very interesting that, both, American Declaration of Independence as well as, that is called French Declaration, they have mentioned about these things, about, life, liberty, and the property of the individual. So this is the time when, gradually, that the concept of right was developed, and the historical movements were there. And because of the certain situation, social situation, the people have started, talking about the importance of rights and to preserve it. So here main emphasis was on what is called life, liberty, and equality. So that was the beginning of, the development of rights. Then when Bolshevik Revolution started, or because of the Bolshevik Revolution, Russia became, a communist country, socialist country in 1917, and that was the time. It was the time of the right. They demanded the right of the working class people. So this is the another new dimension, whether earlier it was more on the individual rights of the individual. Now the Bolshevik Revolution emphasized more on the social rights and rights of the working people. So this is the important point, important aspect of the historical development, whether it was in the Magna Carta of 1215, whether it was the American Declaration of Independence and France, declaration, and the Bolshevik Revolution. Now, after that, the rights were very much, formulated, and to some extent, it has gained certain, significance, especially natural rights, theories. And here we can mention the name of, Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. They talked about the natural rights. So natural rights, if you have to understand natural rights, what is this natural rights? So they hold that there's a natural law, there's a natural law, and this natural law holds that a certain order in nature provides norms for human conduct. So it was in pre-social and pre-political stage, the people had a certain, rights, but because of certain situation, they could not, have these rights, and therefore, when Hobbes talked about the rights, he talks about the right to security, because there was a state of nature, and in a Hobbes state of nature, people were very much, insecure, because life was short, brutish, dirty, and it was very uncertain, situation, and therefore they wanted to get out of that state of nature, and they surrendered their rights to one man, which they call it the Leviathan, and Leviathan would ensure security. So here he emphasized more on the security, and the people surrendered their rights to the one man, so that that man would ensure security. So this is the Hobbes concept of natural rights theory, and this was the a path-breaking situation, and because of which the concept of right was developed. So here Hobbes' contribution was very much great. I will not go into details of the Hobbes concept of security, but then comes Locke. The Locke also talked about this thing, but he was not in favor of authoritarian rule, but rather he said this thing, that people have certain rights, and these rights are, in fact, he talked about these rights, and these rights are life, liberty, and property. And therefore, they say this thing, the government, the state, that's called state, in fact, should protect this, life, liberty, and property. And if they cannot protect it, then people have the rights to overthrow the government, and they will install another government if this government fail to protect it. So therefore, they emphasize more on the limited government, but at the same time, they are talking about more on individual liberty. And here we may call it the liberal individualism. So this was the beginning of development of rights, that is called natural rights. After this natural rights, they are talking, usually people are talking about this human rights, which is basically centered around life, liberty, and the property. And Rousseau also talked about these things, about the security of the people, but in a different context. When he said these things, that people have rights and people have freedom towards each other, and they will have to maintain for a greater happiness or greater well-being of the people. And here he about the general will of the people. And here also you will find the Hobbes, Rousseau said this thing, man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. So he'll have to break these chains. And at the same time, he'll have to protect his own identity. So it was the concept of natural rights, which was developed by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. So this was the, I think, beginning of the development of human rights. When you talk about the theoretical framework of the human rights, then we cannot ignore the contribution of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. So here they emphasize more on what is called natural rights, and which was there in the pre-social and pre-political order also. So this is gradually it was developed later on. Then we'll find on the basis of these things, then we can see these things that human rights can be categorized into three broad category may be there. One is the first generation of human rights. Then we will have second generation of human rights. Then we have third generation of human rights. The first generation of human rights was developed in the 18th century. And because these rights were emerged because of American and French Revolution. And these rights were basically, in fact, these rights are basically civil and political rights. So in fact, right to life, right to liberty, right to freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of association. So these are basically these are the negative rights. These are not the positive rights. That means what? They put restriction on the government not to interfere in the liberty of the individual. And therefore, these were not positive, but rather it was more negative in nature. So this was the development, especially the first generation of human rights. And it was mainly, civil and political rights. Then comes, second generation of human rights, which was developed in the 19th century. But these rights are, in fact, basically security oriented and more positive in nature, which are different from, that first generation of human rights. And these are basically social rights, cultural rights, than economic rights. Therefore, they are talking more about, right to fixed hour of work, minimum, wages, right to form, trade union, right to form, trade union. So these are basically positive rights. And this is the second generation of human rights which was developed in the 19th century. Then comes, third generation of human rights, and which was again, it was again already I have said this thing that because of the Bolshevik Revolution, that they emphasized more on the social rights, and this third generation of human rights emphasized more on the group rights, right to development, right to environment, right to right of groups and the peoples, right to self-determination. So third generation, this is the third generation of human rights. So it is, again, I have said this thing that these rights are developed because of certain conflict situation, because of certain social transformation, and because of this social transformation and because of social conflict, these rights emerge in world politics or in international relations. And in that context, already I have said this thing that because of the French Revolution, because of the American year of independence, and because of Bolshevik Revolution, so these were the certain situation because of which the third generation of human rights also developed because of the two world wars. And these two world wars completely changed the situation. The first world war, which has occurred from 1914 to 1918, the second world war, which has started from 1939 to 1945. So this world wars changed the political and social situation. And because of this, which they demanded more on this thing that is called group rights. This is the third generation of human rights, so which was developed in the 20th century. And because of socio-political turmoils of the two world wars, and they talked about more on the collective rights. So the first generation of human rights, which emphasized more on civil and political rights. Second generation of human rights, we emphasize more on the social and political and economic rights. And the third generation of human rights, which have given more importance on the group rights because of our collective rights. So rights of the groups and people, our right to self-determination. But again, another situation has developed because the women are demanding their rights more and more. And in that, we can refer the name of Mary Western, so who talked about the women rights. And people have said this thing that women rights share the human rights. So some people have said this thing. Now the women rights should be considered as the fourth generation of human rights. Then again, there is debatable point. There is a debate whether it should be considered as the fourth generation of human rights. Then again, some scholars have said this thing, no. Then there is, gay rights are there, rights of the transgender. So these rights should be also given importance. Rights to the transgender, rights should be given to the gay people. So now they are talking about the gay rights. They are talking about the rights of the transgender. So they say this is the fifth generation of human rights. So therefore, we have seen this thing by stage by stage, different concept and different ideas have come, and because of the interpretation of different philosophers, they have given they have interpreted the rights in different different angle, and they say this rights should be given more and more importance. So this is the situation which was developed from the very beginning, that people are starting talking about these things. Suppose now if you analyze Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So if we analyze Universal Declaration of Human Rights, from Article 1, 2 of the Declaration, they talk more about the civil and political rights, and which can be called as the first generation of human rights. So the Article 3 to 21 of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which emphasize more on civil and political rights, and which can be called as the first generation of human rights. Then Article 22 to 27, so outline the social, cultural, and economic rights, and which can be called as second generation of human rights. Then Article 28 to 30 deal with the general dimension to be followed by the member states, which can be called as third generation of human rights. So therefore, in fact, these rights developed in that way. In different dimensions, it was developed and it was elaborated in different historical background and in different historical moment. And at the same time, because of the certain conflict situation, whether it is a social conflict or whether it is in another dimension, in fact, because of the writings of the philosophers, writings of the scholars, they have analyzed these rights. Now in that aspect, I just want to touch thing now that already we mentioned about Magna Carta and Bolshevik Revolution. Now these rights are the natural rights theorists, they talked about this thing about rights which were pre-social and pre-political. And but Bentham, in fact, Bentham challenged this thing. They say these things, rights were not pre-social or pre-political, but rather they said this thing. It is a conscious decisions of the people. They talked about, or they considered the rights from a utilitarian point of view, and they said this thing, these rights are important for them, and they considered in that argument. And they say this thing, no, rights are not pre-social and pre-political, but rather it was not abstract things. Rather it is very concrete. Therefore he said this in Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau, their concepts of rights were more more abstract in nature. But whereas Bentham said this thing, no, rights cannot be abstract in nature, but it is the conscious decisions of the people. And it is because of the utility of the people, they have decided that rights should be there and it should be accepted. So in that way, the Bentham concept of rights is different from natural rights theories. That is also another theoretical formulation which was given by Jeremy Bentham. Now, question comes to our mind about empiricists, especially Karl Marx. Karl Marx was opposed to individual rights, and he said this thing that they have given more importance on individual liberty. They have given more importance on individual rights and freedom. But Marx said this thing, no, the social rights are more important than individual rights. And therefore he said this thing that by these rights, by the liberal individualism, the individual is alienated from each other. Individual is alienated from each other. Therefore, this right cannot be accepted in that way. But rather, he said these things, the rights are social rights, and we'll have to think in that angle. So, so in fact, this system, it is basically it is the bourgeois system, bourgeois idea that where they have given more emphasis on individual rights, not on social rights. Therefore, he opposed to these rights, and his theoretical formulation is different from the liberal individualism, which was advocated by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. Then comes a question of Gandhi also. So his Gandhi's concept of human rights is a little bit different. That he said this thing that one should not insist more on this thing about rights, but rather duties are also important. Therefore, he said the rights and duties are, in fact, the two sides of the same coin. We should not emphasize more on rights, but at the same time, we should be more concerned about the duties. In fact, he said this thing, it is the right of the children to get love from their parents, and it is the duty of the parents to love their children. So here he said this thing, the rights and duties go together. It is not only the rights only, but at the same time duties are also important. Rights and duties are going together, and by that way we can preserve the human rights. So here in that context you can see these things. There's really rights which were developed in the earlier time also, especially in the time of the Magna Carta, in the time of the Bolshevik Revolution, in the time of the French Revolution. So these rights were developed in a particular situation, a particular conflict situation. So this conflict situation, they emphasize certain rights. But at the same time, when people say this thing, the rights are universal, that is also debated by some people. Rights cannot be universal, but rather they are talking about the cultural relativism. They talked about this thing, no, rights cannot be universal. But at the same time, this individual liberalism by individual liberal thinkers, they talked about this thing, right should be universal in character. Though through this Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we have announced this thing, the rights are universal, and Universal Declaration of Human Rights has given complete recognition to this thing, the rights should be universal. But this universal character of human rights also challenged by some people and some organizations. And at the same time, some people have said this in the third world countries also different perspective of these rights. So these third world countries, they talked about culture is more important. Then they are talking about the group rights are more individual, and the culture is different from country to country. Then the Arab countries also, they talked about this thing, their culture is different. So when people have said this thing, that they say this thing, it is the rights of the Muslim woman to have the hijab, which are challenged by the Western liberal thinkers. They say this, it is a violation of human rights of the women, which are not accepted by some of the Islamic countries. They say this thing, no, they have the rights. They have the rights of this of women's. The women should cover their face and they should have the hijab. So this is the cultural. This is called the cultural relativism. This is called, they have given more importance on culture. And sometimes, some people have said this, and they have given more importance on the religion. And in that way, that sometimes rights are also in fact differentiated. That some rights which are applicable in Western countries, that rights may not be applicable in some of the third world countries or third world countries as such. So therefore, there is also debate between universalism and cultural relativism. So these are some of the theoretical questions comes to our mind, that whether this should be given the absolute recognition, that universalism. So some people have said this thing, no, it cannot be given the absolute character of absolute significance of universalism. Now, therefore, now this webinar is basically based on the human rights education. Therefore, definitely we can discuss it. Suppose there are so many sections will be there, so many in fact sessions are technical sessions are there which will discuss differently about women rights, about rights of the gay, rights of the transgender, rights of the tribal people, rights of the some of the northeastern regions, rights of the human rights of the northeastern region. I think that they will focus on this thing, that about this thing, about the human rights education. What sort of education should be given to the people about this thing? Which rights are more important? Or should there be a hierarchy of rights? The certain rights are more important than other rights, or question like the right to liberty, right to property, right of and life is more important than other rights. So should there be a hierarchy of rights? So these sort of questions may come, hierarchy of rights. So I don't know. In fact, this seminar webinar will be very much interesting if people will give more importance on trust on these things about hierarchy of rights. And these rights, when developed in certain historical juncture, and when it was developed by different political philosophers, whether it is Marx, whether it was Bentham, whether it was developed by Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. So therefore, on the basis of these things, we have to analyze these things. And now when you talk about the human rights education, this human rights education, I think probably they will give information on these things through in fact the pamphlet, then discussion, seminars like this type of seminars, like this type of webinar. They may discuss thoroughly the which are the more important. Now people are talking more about the women rights. Then some people have taken it as the women rights are the human rights. Whether it is really true that women rights are human rights. So here also again question comes the violation of violation against women. And now in fact they said it was the patriarchy. It is the male-dominated area where they talked about the human rights from the male angle, from the masculine angle, and they talked about the human rights from that perspective. Women are completely neglected. The women, private sphere, in fact, women's, completely confined into kitchen, and their rights were not at all, given importance. Now, therefore, again, these things comes to our mind. The women's rights should be more and more. Women's rights should be protected. Now, how it can be protected? What sort of guarantees should be given, and whether women are aware of these rights or not? So definitely, human rights education. They may emphasize on this thing whether women are aware of their rights or not, or whether their rights are violated, how this was violated, who has violated these rights, and what sort of constitutional guarantee is there, or whether international law has formulated any sort of the documents that through which women rights are protected and preserved. So these are some of the things. Question comes to our mind. Then certain situation, social situation has question these things, and this was the challenge, and this challenge comes to certain situation, and therefore when these challenges comes, then people talked about these things, about their rights. So earlier when they talked about rights, when this the 13th century, when this barons and bishops, they faced this situation, then they wanted this in when the king oppressed them, they said this no, there should be some sort of guarantee should be given, and therefore there was an agreement. And therefore, there was some sort of agreement between the subject and the king, and they drafted Magna Carta. So therefore, every particular historical moment, this sort of situation was there when people talked about this thing, and they considered that it is important to talk about and seriously solve this situation. So this is in general. I have given a theoretical idea. Though I have not gone deep into this thing, but I have given a just framework of theoretical framework of human rights, but I have not gone into details. So here also, definitely, I think that we can interact, or we can discuss whatever I discuss right now. If I can I can conclude my lecture here, and I expect certain questions may be asked from the participants, and we can share their ideas if they have any ideas on the human rights and their curiosity about human rights, which I have given on a theoretical basis, though in a very sketchy or very small way. But even then, I expect certain questions from your side so that we can discuss it elaborate. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your very fruitful and a very simple but very depth, knowledgeable lecture. I hope our participants, our audience has been highly motivated from your lecture. So now I request if there is any participant who want to ask any question or give any comment, so they can. So please proceed with your questions if you have, or if you have any comment.
Hello, good afternoon, sir.
Yeah.
Am I?
Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, sir.
Sorry for interruption. I also request the participants to switch on their videos, because that would make the discussion live. If you switch off, then that would be more beautiful.
Okay, I will try. Actually, due to network problem, I may not be able to start the video. But let me just congratulate and appreciate the presentation put forwarded by respected sir. Myself, Dr. Mayuri Sharma from Guwahati University, Department of Education. Sir,
Hi.
I would like to know a little bit regarding child rights, as we find that many of the issues are affecting of child rights. So can you,
Plavan, please switch off your microphone.
sir? Yes.
Yeah.
Plavan Bhuya, please switch off your microphone.
Yes. Go ahead. Yes. Yes. Go ahead. Hello. Hello.
Hello, sir. Yes.
What
Once
is
again,
your...
yeah, myself, Dr. Mayuri Sharma from Department of Education, Guwahati University. Sir, I am little bit, interested in knowing about the child rights, as we have been learning that there are many issues of violation of child rights, not in the form of child labor, but the kind of exploitation, or maybe the kind of issues which we are at present learning from the newspapers. So can you please, sir,
No,
elaborate
that, there are certain laws are there. Now here again you will find, already I have said this thing, that rights is recognized by society and enforced by the state. So if you analyze these points, suppose certain rights are recognized by the society. The question is that child rights are recognized by the society. As for example, in a certain age, a child should not be engaged in the menial works, especially in the dhaba, in the restaurant, in the in fact in the home. But what we have seen this thing, the children are abused. Children are abused sexually. The children are abused physically. The children are sometimes have been used as a menial labor. Children have been worked in the domestic servant. But these are the things we are aware of this thing. We should not use this thing. There are certain laws are there that if we engage child labor, then we'll be tried, we'll be arrested. But question is that even then there is a violation of a rampant violation of children's rights. And tragedy is that there's especially child abuse is very much there. And even then government and the society fail to protect these rights when the children are abused very badly. And this is the situation not only in India, especially in Assam also. Recently we have seen this thing, how children these children rights are abused. And at the same time, you will find that school going children, they should not be deprived of the primary and secondary education. But even then, parents are not aware of this thing. Parents are also not sending their children. So therefore, when this human rights education is there, and to this webinar is basically human rights education, therefore we should at least we should create an awareness among the people. At least we should send our children to the to the school and the primary school. But here are certain things that these children, school-going children, are engaged in the works, manual works and manual works. So this is the situation. In Assam also, earlier it was not there, but today, now in fine, papers, newspapers, and in other situations also, we have seen how the children are exploited. Laws are there, but these laws are not implemented. When I talked about this thing, that rights are, the product of the society enforced by the state. But whether really the rights are enforced by the state or not, and how it can be enforced, it can be by it can be through Human Rights Commission, and therefore we have the State Human Rights Commission is there, and the State Human Rights Commission, in fact, they have so many cases are there pending before the Human Rights Commission, and they have seen these things. They have got the reports and how the children are abused, how children rights are violated, then how they are engaged in the manual works especially in the restaurant, at home. But unfortunately, tragedy is that laws are there, constitutional laws are there, but these laws are violated. So at the same time, therefore, it is the awareness. Now today we have this webinar. We will be at least aware of this thing. What is their right? The children below certain age, they should not be engaged in what is called this sort of labor manual works, and they should not be married off especially before 16, before 15. But we have seen this thing, how child marriage took place, and because of this child marriage, some children died also. But even then, no action has been taken against those who are the defaulters, who are violating this children rights. So it is the duty of this our educated class, then academician, then NGOs, and this what is called certain groups who will create awareness among the people, so that children rights should not be violated. In short, this is my humble submission to your query.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. But apart from what I feel, apart from what is happening in the field of maybe industrial sector or whatever, at homes also many times parents unknowingly because of educational pressure or parental pressure, they have been punished, etc., humiliated. So does it also fall under child rights or not? If it is.
No, definitely. In fact, so all these things are, child rights. When I talk about these things, whenever, especially the children, their right to, basic, freedom, access to education, all these things are violated. Definitely, these are the rights, the access to education, access to, the healthy, environment. So all these things are, right to, right for children. So, any other question?
Any other participant? If you have any query, then you can ask her.
Now they can give their own, what is called observation also. They can give their observation. They can give their own observation. It is not necessary that they would like to ask question, and they can, give their own observation about, the theoretical, aspect of, human rights.
Okay, sir. Hello. I'm yeah, sir. I am Dr. Pradeep Burman from Rangapura College. It is near in the district of Shonitpur, near Tezpur. Okay. First of all, sir, very much thanks, because what actually you have elaborated, it was very simple and in depth. That is in nature. So, sir, you mentioned at your initial lecture that a child who is born, he may be that is he or she he does not have, may not have conscience, but I think he has rights. I think he or she has rights. So how can it, sir, clarify it?
No, saying is that,
Yeah.
but I have said this thing, the human rights, have rights because of their conscience. When you say conscience, that means what? Rationality.
Yeah.
That means what? He has reason and he knows what is right and what is wrong. That is called rational human being. An animal, it doesn't have that faculty. That means it doesn't have that rational, thinking. But suppose the newborn babies, it doesn't have that rationality. On that ground, some people have said it is not my ideas, but it is the ideas of certain writer like Bobito. They say this thing that the children, that is called baby, a newborn baby, just a newborn baby, 1 year or two, just 1 day or 2 day newborn baby. He or she doesn't have that rational faculty. It doesn't have that conscience. So how it can have the rights? So because the rights can be acquired only by a human being who has got the consciousness. So in that context, I have said this thing that, a newborn baby, it is 1 day or 2 day newborn baby, because he doesn't have or she doesn't have that kind of consciousness. So in that perspective, we can say it doesn't have that, human rights. So it is a debatable question. So you can, discuss with your, other, friends and others also. You can challenge it also. So, but you can challenge it on that ground. You can challenge it on that ground, whether that child has that consciousness or not, rationality or not. If it does not have that rationality, if the basic premise is that a human being have the human rights because they have the rationality. But a cat and dog and a elephant, they don't have that rationality. But they have the instinct. But they don't have the rationality. And because they don't have the rationality, therefore they do not have the rights. It is the human beings, they can claim. And they can claim on the basis of what? That a dignified way of life. Then another point I have raised, that is called, would I have rights if I lived alone? Here also some scholars have said this thing, that in that context they do not have rights, because rights can be emerged only in relation to others. If I completely live alone, then who will violate my property rights? Who will violate my right to life? Who will violate my right to life, liberty, and property? Because I am completely alone, nobody is there. And therefore, rights can be realized only in the context of the society. It can be realized only within the society. It cannot, beyond the society. Therefore, rights is a claim recognized by society, enforced by the state. And therefore, these rights are natural. These rights are natural, and these rights are inherent, and these rights are inalienable. It cannot be separated. It cannot be alienated. So in that perspective, they have said this thing, the rights are in that way inherent. It is inalienable, and it is natural. So the moment, a person is born, he has with these rights, that's called right to life, right to liberty, right to property. So therefore, necessarily you can contest that thing, that premises, that a baby, newborn baby, he must have right to life. He must have right to life. That means what? He must survive. Though he doesn't have that much of consciousness is not there, but even then he has, that is called right to life. That baby cannot be killed. That baby cannot be thrown away. So that can be also debate. So there's a question of debate. Therefore, I ask this question to you people only because that there is a debatable question. And therefore, every rights in the context of rights, a concept of rights have been debated and discussed. And all these writers, whether it is, Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau, Marx, Bentham, or Meriwether Stern, or Cicero, Plato, Socrates, whenever they have given these rights, it is their personal thinking, and they are thinking in the particular context of the socio-political and economic situation, and on the basis of that, they have given their views on rights and liberty or property. So therefore, there is a different gradation of rights. Therefore, there is a first generation of human rights, second generation of human rights, third generation of human rights, fourth generation of human rights, fifth generation of human rights. So when I say these things, the fifth generation of human rights, that is called gay rights or rights of the transgender, you can challenge it. How can you say this thing that gay rights is the fifth generation of human rights? You can say this thing that is called information technology, or information technology can be also included in the human rights situation. So this can be challenged by different writers and different scholars. Whenever they will go through the different situation, they can contest it. If I say this, that the women rights are the fourth generation of human rights, then also you can contest it. How can it be that women rights are fourth generation of human rights? What are the arguments you can give this thing that women rights are fourth generation of human rights? So this is my when
okay,
theoretical, necessarily there must be theoretical discussion and debate.
Yeah, I think in broad perspective, actually, we discuss. If we discuss in a broad manner, I think the right of a child also may also be included in human rights, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Child rights is a human rights, and this is one of the important pillars of human rights. It is one of the important rights of the human rights. Children's rights, that is called women's rights. All these are rights of the indigenous people, rights of the indigenous people. So there is a section on these things, and in fact, human rights education. There is, in fact, there is a webinar, there is a technical session on rights of the indigenous people. I think. So therefore, rights of the Northeastern people, rights of the indigenous people. So rights of the indigenous people, these are also human rights. Rights of the children, these are also human rights. Women rights are the human rights. So rights of the tribal people, these are also the human rights. So rights of the fishermen, rights of the fishermen, these are also the human rights. Rights of the prisoners, this is also human rights. The prisoners also, they have their rights. That they should be given, proper clothing, they should be given proper food, there should be proper shelter, they should be in international human rights situation, they have been given this sort of rights. So their prisoners' rights are there. And different, international documents also will find this thing, how prisoners have been given these rights, that they should not be tortured, they should not be inhumanly tortured, they should be treated, humanly, they should be given proper clothing, they should be given proper food. So that is also an international human rights situation, which have different, Africa Charter of Human Rights, then European Charter of Human Rights. They're also talking about these things, about these rights, how to protect it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Now,
Okay.
So is there any other query or observation?
Okay then.
So I think there is no more observation or query. So we are also at the end of our technical session 1. It's going to 2:15. So sir, on behalf of the organizing committee, I, Manoj, heartily thank you for your valuable time you have spent with us, and for your enlightened lecture. Sir, the subject human right is like a ocean, and you have given us that ocean in a water bottle in in last 40 minutes. So sir, thank you very much. Thank you again, and I hope we will meet again in near future. So our first technical session ends here, and participants are now advised to take their lunch and join in the second technical session at 2:40 o'clock. Link will be given in their WhatsApp group. So this technical session ends here. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much that you have given me an opportunity to speak before this August gathering. Thank you very much.
So it's our pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jugan, you can end the meeting now.
I request Dr. Zogesh Das to close it.